Physiologically, we are virtually identical to our ancestors who painted images of bison on the walls of the Lascaux cave in France. Among the earliest cultural artifacts have to survive to the present day. Our brains are no larger or more sophisticated than theirs. If one of your babies were to be dropped into the arms of an adoptive parent in the 21st century New York, the child would likely grow up indistinguishable from his or her peers. All that differentiates us from them is our memories, not the memories that reside in our own brains. For the child born today enters the world just as much as a blank slate as the child born 30,000 years ago, but rather memories that are stored outside ourselves, in books, photographs, museums, and these days in digital media. Once upon a time, memory was at the root of all culture, but over the last 30 millennia, since humans began painting their memories on cave walls, we gradually supplanted our own natural memory with vast superstructure of external memory aids. The process that has sped up exponentially in recent years. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that all the world's ink had become invisible, and all our bites had disappeared. Our world would immediately crumble. Literature, music, law, politics, science, math. Our culture is an edifice built on externalized memories. If memory is our means of preserving that which we consider most valuable, it is also painfully linked to our own traits. When we die, our memories die with us. In a sense, the elaborate system of externalized memory we created is a way of fending off morality. It allows ideas to be efficiently passed across time and space, and for one idea to begin on another to a degree not passing when a thought has to be passed from brain to brain. In order to be sustained, the externalization of memory not only changed how people think, it also led to a profound shift in the very notion of what it means to be intelligent. Internal memory becomes devalued. Erudition evolved from possessing information internally to knowing how and where to find the labyrinth world of external memory. It's telling a statement that pretty much the only place where you'll find people still training their memory is at the World Memory Championship and the dozen national memory contests held around the globe. What was once a cornerstone of Western civilization is now, at best, a curiosity. But as our culture has transformed from one that was fundamentally based on internal memories to one that fundamentally based on memories stored outside the brain, what are the implications for ourselves and for our society? What we've gained is indisputable, but what have we traded away? What does it mean that we've lost our memory? 2. The men who remember too much. In May 1928, a young journalist S. walked into the office of the Russian neuropsychologist A.R. Luria and politely asked to have his memory tested. He had been sent by his boss, the editor of the newspaper where he worked. Each morning at the daily editorial meeting, his boss would dole out the day's assignments to the room full of reporters in a rapid stream of facts, contracts, and addresses that they would need to file here. Stories. All the reporters took copious notes, except one. S simply watched and listened. One morning, fed up at the reporter's apparent inattentiveness, the editor took S aside to lecture him about the need to take his job seriously. Did he think all that information was being read off each morning just because the editor could hear his own voice? Did he think that he could report his stories without context? That he could simply reach out to people telepathically without knowing their addresses? If he hoped to have any future in the world of newspaper journalism, he'd have to begin paying attention and jotting notes, the editor told him. S stared at the editor blankly through his scolding and waited for him to finish. Then he calmly repeated back every detail of the morning meeting, word for word. The editor was floored. He didn't know what to say, but S would later claim that S felt the bigger shock until that moment. He said he'd always assumed that it was perfectly normal for a person to remember everything. Upon arrival at Luria's office, S remained skeptical about his own uniqueness. He wasn't aware of any peculiarities in himself and couldn't conceive of the idea that his memory differed from other people's. We called the psychologist who gave him a series of tests to evaluate his powers of recall. Luria started by asking S to memorize a list of numbers, and listed in amazement as his shy subject recited back 70 digits, first forward, then backward. It was no consequence to him whether the series I gave him contained meaningless words of nonsense, syllables, numbers, or sounds, whether they were presented orally or in writing. So all he required was that there be a 3 to 4 second pause between each element in the series. He had no difficulty reproducing whatever I gave him. Luria gave us test after test, and kept getting the same result. The man was unprovable. As the experimenter, I soon had to admit that I had been unable to perform what one would think was the simplest task as a psychologist can do: measure the capacity of an individual's memory. Luria gave Luria wanted Luria would go on to study us the next 36 years and would eventually write a book about him. The Mind of a Monomist, a little book about a vast memory that has become one of the most enduring classics in literature of abnormal psychology. S could memorize complex mathematical formulas without knowing any math, Italian poetry without speaking Italian, and even phrases of gobbledygook. But even more remarkable than the breadth of material he could commit to memory was the fact that his memory seemed never to degrade. For normal humans, memory gradually decays with time, along what's known as the curve of forgetting. For the moment of grasp, a new piece of information, your memory holds on its beginning to slowly loosen until finally it lets go altogether. In the last decade of the 19th century, the German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus set out to qualify this inexorable process of forgetting. In order to understand how memories fade over time, he spent years memorizing 2,303 letter nonsense syllables like goof, lur, and knock. At set periods, he would test himself to see how many of the syllables he'd forgotten and how many he managed to retain. When he graphed the results, he got a curve that looked like this. No matter how many times he performed the experiment on himself, the results were always roughly the same. In the first hour after learning a set of nonsense syllables, more than half of them would be forgotten. After the first day, another 10% would disappear. After a month, another 14%. After the memories that were left had more or less stabilized, they had become consolidated in long-term memory, and the pace of forgetting slowed as a gentle creep. This memory seemed not to follow the curve of forgetting, no matter how much he'd been asked to remember, or how long ago it had been. As many as 16 years in some cases, he was able to recite back the material with the same exactitude as he just learned it. He would sit with his eyes closed, pause, then comment, "Yes, yes, this was the series you gave me. Once, when we were in your apartment, you were sitting at the table. You were wearing a gray suit." And with that, he would reel off the series precisely as it had given it to him in an earlier session. Right, wrote Luria. In Luria's lyrical account, S seemed at times like a visitor from another planet, and in the annals of abnormal psychology, his case has often been treated as entirely sui generis. But I was about to learn there is far more exciting interpretation of S's story that, as weird and singular a case as S might have been, there are much that the rest of our normal enfeebled, forgetful brains could learn from his. Indeed, his extraordinary skills may lie in dormant in all of us. After I had wrapped up my reading of the competition that had brought me to New York, standard journalistic protocol would have been to head back home to write a short article and move on to some other story, but that's not what happened. Instead of boarding a train to Washington, I found myself standing in the back of another auditorium. This at a public high school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where Ed Cook was supposed to teach a roomful of 16-year-olds how to use memory techniques to ace their exams. I canceled my plans for the day intact, along because he promised that if I hung around with him long enough, he would explain to me in detail how he and Lucas had taught themselves to remember like us. Just before delving into any esoteric secrets, there was some basic groundwork to be laid. Ed wanted Ed wanted to show me and the students that our memories were already extraordinary, at least when it came to learning certain kinds of information. To do that, he had brought along a version of a memory test known as 2 Alternative Picture Recognition Exam. After introducing himself to the students with some self-deprecating humor, "I'm from England, where we prefer to spend our time memorizing rather than developing full social lives." He demonstrated his mnemonic ball finds by learning 7 multi-digit number in just over a minute, 3 times faster than it took S to perform the same feat, and then proceeded straight into a test of students, memorizing in my mind. I'm going to show you guys a bunch of pictures, and I'm going to show them to you really, really fast, he announced, trying to lift his voice above the clamoring teenagers. I want you to try to remember as many of them as you can. He pressed a button on a remote control, and the overhead lights dimmed. A series of slides began to blink across a projection screen at the front of the room, each lingering for less than half a second. There was a slide of Muhammad Ali standing triumphantly over Sonny Liston, then a slide of barbells, then Neil Armstrong's footprint on the moon, then the cover of Friedrich Nietzsche's on the genealogy of morals, and a red rose. There were 30 such pictures, each appearing and disappearing so quickly that it was hard to imagine we'd ever be able to recall any of them, much less all of them. But I tried my hardest to capture some detail from each item to make a quick mental note of what I was looking at. After the last slide, a picture of a goat, the wall went blank and the lights came back on. Now do you think you'll be able to remember all those pictures? Ed asked us. A girl sitting just in front of me sarcastically shouted, "Not a chance," provoking giggles from several of her colleagues. "That's the spirit," Ed yelled back, then looked down at his watch to note the time. Of course, the point of the exercise. Why else would he have given it? Was that we would be able to remember all those pictures like the girl in front of me. I found it hard to believe. After giving us 30 minutes to curve of forgetting to work its inevitable erasure on the image we'd glanced at so quickly, Ed put up a new set of slides. This time, there were 2 pictures on the screen. One of them we'd seen before, and one of them we had Muhammad Ali on the left, and a fizzling Alka-Seltzer tab on the right. He asked us all to point out the picture we recognized. Easy enough, we all knew we'd seen Muhammad Ali, not the Alka-Seltzer tablet. Isn't it striking how easy you remember that, said Ed, before clicking through to another slide, a deer on the left and EinsteinBook on the right. We all knew that one, too. In fact, he went through 30 slides, and everyone in the room recognized every single one of the photos we'd seen before. Now, here's the fascinating thing, said Ed, facing professionally at the front of the linoleum tiled auditorium. We could have done this with 10,000 slides, and you'd have performed almost equally well. Your memory for image is that good. He was referring to a frequently cited set of experiments carried out in the 1970s using the exact same picture recognition test that we'd just taken. Only instead of 30 pictures, the researchers asked their subjects to remember 10,000. It took a full week to perform the test. That's a lot of pictures for a mind to keep track of, especially since the subjects were only able to look at each image once. Even so, the scientists found that people were able to remember more than 80% of what they'd seen. In a more recent study, the same test was performed with 2,500 images, but instead of asking people to choose between an image of Muhammad Ali and an Alka-Seltzer tablet, an easy choice no matter how effervescent osseous clay might have been. They had to choose between alternative images that were almost identical, a stack of $5 bills versus a stack of $1 bills, a green train car versus a red train car, a bell with a narrow handle versus a bell with a wide handle. Even when the images differed only in a tiny detail, people still remember 90% of them correctly. I found those numbers astonishing, but I realized they were merely quantifying something that I just instinctively knew, that our memories do a pretty darn good job for all our griping over the everyday failings of our memories and misplaced keys. The forgotten name of the factoid stuck on the tip of a tongue. Their bigger failing may be that we forget how rarely we forget. Here's the most incredible thing about the test I just gave you, Ed declared. We could play this game several years from now and ask you which of these photos you've seen before, and you'd actually be able to point to the right one more often than not. Somewhere in your mind, there's a trace from everything you've ever seen. The sound that sounds like a bold and possibly dubious claim, one that I was curious to look into exactly how good are our memories. I wondered, is it possible we have the capacity to remember everything? This notion that our brains don't ever really forget is certainly embedded in the way we talk about our memories. The metaphors we most often use to describe memory and the photographs, the tape recorder, the mirror, the computer all suggest mechanical accuracy, as if the mind were some sort of meticulous transcriber of our experiences. Indeed, I lived that away somewhere in the cerebral attic, and if they can't be found, it isn't because they vanished, but only because we've misplaced them in a off-sided paper published in 1980. The psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, all her colleagues, found that full 84% of them agreed with this statement. Everything we learn is permanently stored in our mind, in the mind. Although sometimes particular details are not accessible, with hypnosis or special techniques, these inaccessible details could eventually be recovered. Loftus goes on to say that conviction that has its modern origins in a set of experiments carried out from 1934 to 1954 by a Canadian neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield. Penfield used electrical probes to stimulate the brain to epileptic patients while they were laying conscious on the operating table. With their skulls exposed, he was trying to pinpoint the source of their epilepsy. The hopefully cure it. But he found that when his probe touched a certain part of his patient's temporal lobe, something very unexpected happened. The patient started describing vivid, long-forgotten memories. When he touched the same spot again, he often elicited the same memory. Based on those experiments, Penfield came to believing that the brain records everything in which it pays any degree to conscious attention, and that this recording is permanent. The Dutch psychologist Willem Wagner came to believe the same thing. For 6 years between 1978 and 1984, he kept a diary of the one or most notable happened to him each day. For each event was on a separate card. For each event, he wrote down what occurred, who was involved, where occurred, and when each separate event, each on a separate card. In 1984, he began testing himself to see just how much of these 60 years he'd be able to recall. He would pull out a random card and see if he had any memories of the events described that day. He found that he could recall almost everything that happened, especially the more recent events, with just a few retrieval clues, but nearly 20% of the oldest memories seemed to have totally disappeared. That these events described in his own diary felt totally foreign region, as if they happened to a stranger. But were those memories really gone? Wagner wasn't convinced they were. He decided to take another look at 10 events that he could believe he'd completely forgotten, and in which his diary suggested that another person had been present. He went back to those people and asked them for details that might help him recall his lost memories. In every single case, with enough prodding, someone was able to supply a detail that led Wagner to retrieve other parts of the memory. Not one of his memories had actually disappeared. He concluded that, in light of this one cannot say that any event is completely forgotten. Even so, over the last 3 decades, most psychologists have grown less optimistic that we in fact possess perfect memories of the past, just waiting to be uncovered. As neuroscientists have begun to unravel some of the mysteries of exactly why memory is, it's become clear that the fading, it's clear that we began to unravel the mysteries of what exactly a memory is. It's become clear that fading, mutating, and eventually disappearing of memories over time is a real physical phenomenon that happens in the brain at a cellular level. And most now agree that Penfield's experiment elicited hallucinations, something more like deja vu, or a dream than real memories. Nevertheless, the sudden reappearance of long-lost episodes of one's past is familiar enough experience, and the notion with just the right cue we might have somehow be able to pull out every single bit of information. That once went into our brains persists. In fact, probably the single most common misperception about human memory, the one that Ed had so casually left off, is that some people have a photographic memory. When I followed him about that, he couldn't find that he photographic he kind that he used to wake up in cold sweat, worrying that some days someone with a photographic memory would read about the World Memory Championships in the newspaper, show up, and blow him and his colleagues out of the water. He was reassured to learn that most scientists now agree that this is unlikely to happen. Even though many people claim to have a photographic memory, there's no evidence that anyone can actually store mental snapshots and recall them with perfect fidelity. Indeed, only one case of photographic memory has ever been described in the scientific literature. In the 1970s, a Harvard vision scientist named Charles Strohmeyer III published a paper in Nature. One of the world's most respected journalists published a paper in Nature of the world's most respected scientific journals about a young woman named Elizabeth, a Harvard student who could perform an astonishing feat. Strohmeyer showed Elizabeth's right eye a pattern of 10,000 random dots. And a day later, he showed her left eye another image of dot patterns. Astonishingly, Elizabeth was able to mentally fuse the two images as if they were one with eye magic. Random dot stereograms that were a fad in the 1990s. When she claimed to see every single new image where two dot patterns overlapped. Elizabeth seemed to offer the first conclusive proof that photographic memory is possible. But then, in a soap opera twist, Strohmeyer married her, and she was never the subject of further testing. In 1979, another researcher named John Merritt decided to investigate Strohmeyer's claims. He placed a photographic memory test in the magazines and newspapers around the country. It consisted of two random dot drawings. Merritt hoped someone might come forward with ability similar to Elizabeth to prove that her case was not unique. He figures that roughly 1 million people tried their hand at the test. Of that, 130 wrote in with the right answer, and 15 agreed to be studied by Merritt. But with scientists looking over their shoulder, none of them could pull Elizabeth's nifty trick. There are so many unlikely circumstances surrounding the Elizabeth case. The marriage between subject, scientist, the lack of further testing, the inability to find anyone else with her ability, that some psychologists have concluded that there's something fishy about Strohmeyer's findings. He denied it. We don't have any doubt about our data, he told me over the phone. Still, his one-woman study admits is not strong evidence for other people having photographic memory. Growing up, I'd been enchanted by stories about ultra-Orthodox Jews who had memorized all 5,422 pages of the Babylonian Talmud so thoroughly that when a pin was stuck through any of the Talmud's 63 tractates of books, they could tell you which word passed through on every page. I'd always assumed those stories had been apocryphal, a bit of Hebrew school lore, like levitating rabbi or the wallet-cum suitcase made out of foreskins. But it turns out that pinprick Talmudists are as legit members of Jewish pantheon as the mighty atoms. In 1970, a psychologist named George Stratton wrote up a study in the journal Psychological Review about a group of Polish Talmudic scholars known as the Shao Polak, literally the Talmud Pole, who lived up to their reputation of pinpoint precision. But he noted in his commentary, despite the impressive memories of the Shao Polak, none of them ever attained any prominence in the scholarly world. The Shao Polak didn't possess photographic memories so much as a single-minded perseverance. In this study, if the average person decided he was going to dedicate his entire life to memorizing 5,422 pages of text, he'd also eventually get to be pretty good at it. So if photographic memory is just a myth, what about the Russian journalist? If he wasn't taking snapshots in his mind, what exactly was he doing?